Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Geneva. Our church is part of a living tradition. We're bound by our common history, our affirmation of the great spiritual quest for truth and meaning, and by the promises we make to one another about the spiritual values that we uphold. We have no creed, no tests of faith. Your questions and your doubts are welcome here. Wherever you are on your journey, we invite you to be part of this congregation in which we draw wisdom from all the world's religions, balanced with the insights of modern science. Here we hope to build a diverse, beloved community, and it is our great hope to inspire each other, to challenge each other, and to accompany one another as together we act for peace, love, hope, and justice in our own lives and in our larger world. The title for today's sermon, The Invention of Air, comes to me as the title of a 2008 book by Stephen Johnson, which is subtitled, A Story of Science, Faith, Revolution, and the Birth of America. It tells the story of the Reverend Joseph Priestley, whose 289th birthday we are celebrating this morning. Reverend Priestley, for those of you that are unfamiliar, was English, a scientist, a writer with over 500 publications to his name, and as far as we can tell, he was also the first Unitarian to preach in the United States of America. This morning, I want to lift up Priestley along with Judith Sargent Murray, another luminary in our peculiar religious constellation. Murray, born 18 years after Priestley, was, like Priestley, a brilliant and prolific writer, publishing hundreds of popular essays. She wrote in support of women's rights, the New Republic, citizenship, virtue, philanthropy, war, and last but not least, Universalism, her chosen faith. Many of you may know her as the wife and partner of the Reverend John Murray, who was her second husband, and who was arguably the first Universalist preacher in the United States. These two individuals are fascinating to me, in part because their lives were remarkable, and in part because their lives were remarkably similar, and sit at a similar part of our remarkable country's history. But it's also in part because of how they were able to do what they did. I believe that our faith tradition today would be very different without them. And what I want to suggest is that none of their accomplishments would have happened without the generous support of the friends that they made along the way. This is a good time to do our thing. So I'm going to invite the tech team to bring our remote guests back into the sanctuary. And if you haven't activated your camera, this is an awesome time to do it. And for those of you online or in the room, in the spirit of our friend, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III of Trinity Church here in Chicago, I want you now to turn to a neighbor. Online, just pick a box, turn to that box. Yes, I'm looking right at you. Just turn. There we go. Turn to a neighbor and say to that neighbor, through your masks and with your indoor voices, say, neighbor, neighbor. Oh neighbor, oh, neighbor. We grow giants. We grow giants. Excellent, well done. Thank you so much. It's not hard. It's the interactive portion of today's sermon. Now, by all accounts, Joseph Priestley was a rare character. He was agreeable, supportive, curious, cheerful almost to a fault, and was universally well-liked. Well, almost universally. I'll come back to that. He was an ordained minister in the dissenting church in England. Anybody ever heard of that? The dissenting church? I hadn't really heard of that either. But the history of that deviation from the Church of England is almost as old as the Church of England itself, and features colorful traditions like the Puritans, the Pilgrims, the Quakers, the Baptists, the Congregationalists, the Presbyterians, and the Unitarians. Now, over the course of his ministry, Priestley became convinced that he'd gotten things rather wrong theologically. The divinity of Christ, that was an error. The virgin birth, also an error. In fact, there were quite a few errors that he identified. So in 1774, he decided enough was enough. He helped found and launch the Unitarian Church in England. Apparently, the Methodists were so annoyed at this and at Priestley's seemingly endless stream of publications in support of his clearly heretical ideas that they wrote a hymn asking God to, quote, "the Unitarian fiend expel and chase his doctrine back to hell." Isn't that great? I mean, if you haven't inspired a hymn like this, are you even living? Now, here's the fun bit, right? Until the Unitarian Relief Act of 1813, it was illegal to publicly deny the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. Publicly deny. You can't say the Trinity isn't real. You can't do that. That's illegal. So it was that in 1791, a mob, apparently completely fed up with Priestley's endless mouthiness, burned down his church and his home. Fearing for their lives, he and his family fled to the United States at the invitation of his very good friend, Benjamin Franklin. Now, when Priestley was a young man, he'd become quite taken with the work of folks who dabbled in the art of electricity. Back then, one could buy or assemble any number of cool devices that you could use for parlor tricks, like causing your hair to stand up on end, or magnetizing metal, or even levitating small objects. Good stuff, good times. Now, Priestley's curiosity about this brought him to London, where he, one summer, went to a coffee house. Now, this is a long time ago, and I just want to say that there's an enormous number of things that happened in the history of the world as a result of coffee. Just saying. So at this coffee house, he met a whole bunch of these scientists who actually called themselves electricians. That was their self-ascribed titles. They were electricians. These were the scientists of the day, including Benjamin Franklin, who became a lifelong pen pal and friend. Now, at this meeting, the connections and friendships he made generated a book idea, which came out in 1767. It's called The History and Present State of Electricity. In this book, Priestley collected firsthand accounts from all of these interesting folks, and then went ahead and described their work in almost excruciating detail. Everything, all of the gear, so that a reader might build their own. All of the mistakes, so a reader might follow out all of the trains of thought. All of the dead ends, so a reader might avoid them. All of the very suggestive leads, so that a reader might build on them. The book was actually a textbook for over 100 years, but it was clearly assembled with the intent to not only tell the story of electricity, but to inspire the reader to take it up. So if you're a fan of Carl Sagan, Bill Nye, Neil deGrasse Tyson, you can thank Joseph Priestley for inventing the popular science book. What Priestley is known for today, though, and actually, yes, that's all right. So what Priestley is known for today, though, is not related to electricity at all. It's actually related to chemistry. What we mean by air, the word air, we owe to Priestley. He discovered 10 new to science gases, including oxygen, ammonia, nitrogen, and carbon monoxide. And it was his experiments, published with his usual level of detail, that led directly to the creation of modern chemistry. It's what earned him the Copley Medal, which we can think of as the predecessor to the Nobel Prize. He also invented carbonated beverages. All the other stuff, whatever, right? Yeah. Carbonated beverages is where it's at. He didn't actually capitalize on any of that. Some guy named Schweppes managed to do that, using conversations and detailed notes from Joseph Priestley. Opportunities lost. But Priestley did all of this while he was working as a parish minister. And just in case you were wondering, your current minister is terrifically boring and harbors no such miraculous hobbies. Very sorry to the search committee, you should have asked. You had no idea what was possible. All right, fair enough. So I want to turn now to Judith Sargent Murray. Murray was born in Massachusetts to a wealthy merchant family. Lacking other options, she was largely self-taught and got most of her education just wandering through the family library. And it was her lifelong annoyance at the appalling lack of educational opportunities available to women at that time that led her to her founding of one of the very first schools for women in the United States. We can thank Murray's first husband for launching her writing career. John Stevens, it seemed, was a very good ship's captain and not a very good businessman. By the end of the Revolutionary War, he went bankrupt, and facing debtor's prison, he took his boat and fled to the West Indies, where he promptly died. Now, left to make her ends meet, Murray began writing essays. And in a series of essays supporting the idea of, quote, Republican motherhood, she argued that our new nation would require intelligent and virtuous citizens. And since education of those young voters depended on mothers, those mothers must be themselves educated. That's right. It's just logic, right? She also argued that the difference between the sexes, the genders, had nothing to do with biology, physiology, or history, just simply a criminal lack of access to quality education. Anybody here know Mary Wolstonecraft? That name familiar, right? For those of you that are kind of struggling, reaching for it, I'll just help you out. She's often credited as the founder of modern feminism, actually the founder of feminism, period, right? And it was because of her book, the 1792 book, Vindication of the Rights of Women, that was largely discussed as the first publication lifting up women and the idea of equality. However, to just give credit where it's actually due, it was Murray's essay titled On the Equality of the Sexes, which was published first. And it was a full year before Wollstonecraft's book. Also, speaking of firsts, Murray was also a playwright. Her play, The Medium, was likely the first by an American author to be produced for the stage anywhere. So let me rewind just a tiny bit. Back in 1770, the Universalist minister John Murray arrived in the United States. Interestingly, not coincidentally, it was Judith's family that granted him the land to open up the first Universalist church in America. After the war, which Reverend Murray spent as chaplain serving under George Washington, they met again. And Judith apparently found John's preaching exhilarating. It could happen. But anyway, they were married in 1788. But I want to note that it was Judith's writing that kept them solvent and able to travel. So the idea of spreading the good word of Christian universalism, Judith. I don't think it's too strong to say that we have Universalist as part of our denominational name because of the work of Judith Sargent Murray. Now, there's a lot to say about Priestley and Murray, more than I have time for this morning. But if you are curious, please do consider joining us this afternoon for our ongoing UU history class. Details are in the Mini Pioneer. And yes, for those that are curious, I will be adding a second parallel class over Zoom sometime in the next couple weeks. So stay tuned for that. As we turn to the close, I want to tie these two figures together, Judith Sargent Murray, Joseph Priestley, because both stand at the roots of our modern tradition. What strikes me today, this morning, is that both of them could have done something quite different. And had they made that choice, we today would be quite different. On one hand, it was Joseph Priestley's writings and sermons that inspired not only generations of scientists, but also the revolution that became American Unitarianism and later Transcendentalism. On the other, it was John in the pulpit and Judith in print that popularized Universalism's triumphant rejection of original sin, human depravity, and hell. And those rejections are what was the basis for modernism. That firm and unwavering belief throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries in, quote, the onward, upward, forever trajectory of human progress. And I like to think that Judith Murray, perhaps the very first American feminist author, would be delighted to know that 3/4 of the ministers in her faith tradition currently identify as female. That there are more women today graduating from college than men. And that it has been shown repeatedly and conclusively that women can, have, and do change the world. I'm also reminded that none of that would have been possible without significant support. Priestley's work in electricity, chemistry, and theology was possible because he had gobs of free time. He refused repeatedly to take up more prestigious roles because they would be more time-consuming. He refused those roles in England and in the United States, including refusing requests from both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson to fill empty pulpits in Boston and Monticello. He was able to refuse those positions because of the generosity of his patrons, among whom were actually, ironically, the Lord Shelburne, who was the British Prime Minister during the War of Independence. You can imagine the awkwardness there. Judith Murray's essays calling for women's rights caught the attention of such giants as Martha Washington and Abigail Adams. And it was Abigail's patronage and financial support early on that gave Murray the confidence and time to write more. It was Abigail's influence that landed Murray a regular column in a statewide magazine, the Massachusetts Magazine, and finally brought her and her family a stable wage. When Murray collected her essays into books, she sold them in advance through a network of subscribers, a very clever idea, by the way, a network that she established with endorsements from Martha and Abigail's husbands, George and John. While I believe that Joseph Priestley and Judith Sargent Murray were the sparks that set the Unitarian Universalist chalice ablaze way back in the 18th century, I believe it is also fair to say that they were able to be that because they had the freedom, time, and encouragement to explore and expound their convictions, their morality, their insightfulness. And these aspirational messages inspired those around them to help them do even more. They were able to grow our imaginations, transform our history, and even to bend the arc of the moral universe, if just a bit, toward human progress, precisely because they were held in a network of mutuality and security, because of the gifts of the generous. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not Joseph Priestley and I'm not Judith Sargent Murray. I'm not suggesting that your pledges will help me invent air or gender equality. I'm just a guy with a lantern searching for truth and meaning. That's it. And I am not putting myself down by saying that there are giants standing astride our history. And if my lantern shines as far as it does, I know it is only because I am privileged to stand on their shoulders. What I want to say is that in this congregation and in others like it across this country, there are giants. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The sheer weight of talent and intelligence in the average UU congregation borders on the ludicrous. I have had the honor to be humbled by this congregation and by other congregations like this one over and over again. That's awesome. I'd like to say that this is a place where we get to be our whole selves, not widgets or cogs or producers or consumers. Here we get to be smart. We get to feel. We get to connect. And because of that space that we've made, because we make it so, because of our gifts, we grow giants. This is who we are. And what we are is because of what we do. We are here to support each other. And it is through our gifts that we make this house our house, a house of love. Yes. Of compassion. Yes. Of spiritual growth. Yes. We are a house built on the recognition that revelation is not sealed. There is always more. And it is this mystery and our wonder for a wide open cosmos that lives here, breathes here, calls us forward here. This is our house, a temple we build every day to celebrate the ideal of truth-seeking. And the only way we do that, the only way we live that, the only way we create that is with each other, together. Our gifts, brought forth to lift up the wisdom of yesterday, married to the convictions of the day, to live into the promise of tomorrow. Our gifts of time, talent, and yes, treasure. This is how we build a house worthy of our history, worthy of giants. Continue your journey in love. Care for one another and care for this, our earth. Do justice and make peace. And as you go, know that whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and this place of hope, joy, love, or peace, that goes with you out into the world. We are different for having spent this time together. So remember, live boldly and with thanksgiving. Thank you.